So, Askwikwasin, everyone. Welcome. Kanupia, it's after 11 already. I figured I would do some pre-things. First, welcome everyone to Tomaquag Museum. And secondly, give some shout outs to our amazing funders, because some people that have been here a little while ago noticed we have all new cases. And we're very excited about that, and we can thank the Champlain Foundation for that. We can thank Ocean State Charities Trust for this amazing microphone system thing we've got going on now. It turns out the one we were using was from the 1970s. So it did us good justice. It kind of kaputted just in the last year and a half or so. So we used it well. So I welcome everyone here to Tomaquag Museum. We're very excited today to share with you a project that the four of us and one other, Kathleen Bragdon, who happens to be a professor at William and Mary, an anthropologist and a linguist, and has written many a book about Native peoples, the Narragansett people in specific, but also others here on the East Coast, focusing on a variety of topics, including slavery and language and culture and history. Unfortunately, she's a professor at William and Mary, a little hard for her to jet set up here for the weekend, so she was unable to attend. But I did want to, kind of bring her in the room with us today. So we're really excited to share about this project and to have you read and enjoy these books and hopefully use them as resources for lots of time to come. And then I want to thank our wonderful volunteer here, Joanne, who is videoing for us, which is a great thing. We sometimes struggle to have enough people to do that. So if there's anyone who's like, oh, I want to volunteer at Tomaquag, you let us know. We're always in need of extra hands. And I guess I'll introduce myself first. I'm Loren Spears. I'm the executive director here at Tomaquag Museum. I'm Narragansett Niantic, and I'm very happy to be sort of our facilitator of our panel, as well as one of our panelists today. I suppose almost always when I'm somewhere else, I do my introduction in Narragansett, so I don't know why I didn't, since our book is about language today, so I'll do it again. Askwikwasin, Natasuis Makasini Pashao at Nahai Gansek, Natasuis Loren Spears at Englisha, Ni Nahai Gansek Nahantek, Kanupiam at Aki at Nahai Gansek, Ka Katabatash Wuchi Wame Matumwasasag. So what I said to you is I said hello, and I said that my traditional name is Makasini Pashao, which is the moccasin flower or the lady slipper, and my most common name that people call me is Loren Spears, and that I am Narragansett Niantic, and welcome to the homelands of the Narragansett people, which is pretty much what we consider the state of Rhode Island today. And then I said thank you to these lovely women over here that worked on this project with me, or I with them. And I want to also put a very big shout out to the Crane Foundation, because the Crane Foundation was the funder for this project that helped us be able to do this work. And without them and without their passion for this topic, it might have just been a conversation that people like Sandy and my mother Dawn and I and other people in our tribal community were talking about as we were doing language classes. And so I'm going to let them continue to talk about some of those things, but I just wanted to welcome you here.
Hi, my name is Sandy Robinson, and I am not Native. I'm not trying to present myself as that, but my husband is, and my daughters are. So my family is, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins through my husband. And I've always been accepted as Narragansett. I've been invited into the language classes with the Narragansett, and so I could support my family in keeping the language. And as we had language classes, and as we developed, I got very excited about it. And so we started talking about how can we make this so that it can be more accessible to everybody and more consistent. And so that's where we started this project. And my language teacher, Dawn, was the one who inspired most of this.
Askuikwasanamasi Tampwa, Natasui Dawn Dove. And I'm very happy to be here and excited about the publication of this book. As Sandra said, we had worked on this, that the idea of the book was forever, but for it to come to pass, when the four of us began working together and we brought in the linguist, Kathleen Bragdon. We had worked with her previously within the Narragansett language classes and program, and she was, as she says, thanks for remembering her at the end of her introduction. I think I would guess that we've spoken to this, but at the heart of all of this work has been to make Roger Williams' Key more accessible to the Narragansett people and more accessible to the everyday layperson, rather than those that are sitting in academia and that they are perusing. We wanted it to be so that the everyday person could read, and kind of our biggest project, part of this was retyping the whole thing so that it wasn't in that Middle English script or the font that was there, so it was certainly more readable, and then translating not the Narragansett, but translating the English into more contemporary English. And then the third part was adding our footnotes, giving an indigenous viewpoint to some of the commentary that was written by Roger Williams. So I think that's like the new part of what this edition brings to the world, to our community.
I'm Dorothy Papp. I am not indigenous from this part of the world, anyway. I am indigenous to the planet. And have always have a keen interest in the cultures and people who are more recently still very tied to the earth and the cultures, especially here in America. I also a big fan of Roger Williams in his beliefs in liberty of conscience. He's really very much responsible for as much separation of church and state as we have. Those ideas came first from Roger Williams, which at the very beginning, in the first just several months after he arrived here, he was banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony for his belief in liberty of conscience. And the Narragansett really saved him. The very first word that he translates in the book is natop, friend. And to go back to that relationship and that respect for the people who were already here when the Europeans arrived I'm very excited about the prospect of making of working on this project and making this project happen. When I came in and first met Dawn and sort of asked her about such a project, she was already working on it. They were already rewriting it into a 20th century font and all of those things. So I'm very honored to have gotten to work on this.
So at the very beginning of the book, we start with the acknowledgments, which I think is really important because we first wanted to honor the Narragansett people. Katapata Shwuchi Nahai Gansek Nininamunum. Oh, goodness. Ninim Missum. Pronounce that, Mother. I can't pronounce it. My tongue is tied. The last word. Nunama Sanawag. See, I'm an oral tradition person. When she says it, I can say it. But when I read it, sometimes I add all kinds of other weird things to it. But I really wanted to kind of just spotlight a couple of things that are in the acknowledgments to acknowledge our elders in our community that continue to pass on our traditional language going forward. People that taught language classes, my mother Dawn, Ella Sikatow, Cecil Addison, and those that came before them. We really wanted to thank the language committee, which we named quite a few people that participated in that, if not all, and all the people that participated in the language classes as well. And really our youth as well that continue to push forward and use technology and all kinds of unique strategies to perpetuate and I think the word is promulgate the language so that people are using it more and more and more. But we also wanted to acknowledge quite a few people that had special skills that gave us special cultural knowledge, something that we sometimes call traditional ecological knowledge, that when we were talking about a footnote in there, that they gave their expertise in a particular area, such as medicinals or other kinds of special art and cultural knowledge. Also, Neil Safier from John Carter Brown Library they hold the original manuscript of the original book, and they allowed us to use their digital version to launch this project. And John McNiff from the Roger Williams National Memorial, who helped us find some maps, and he's just working at the memorial. He was very connected to the maps of this region. And then lastly, Westholme Publishing, who published the book. So next, I really want us to talk about, we did it a little bit, but maybe some people have some things they'd like to add, which is going more in depth on the purpose and project and our goals. I believe that my mother Dawn mentioned them already, but I want to say that already interacting with people in regards to this book, an additional goal for me is around making sure educators and students have access to this. And when it was in Old English, you had to be an Old English literary scholar to kind of slog your way through the book. As people passionate about it, we were doing that. But it's not easy for the average person that just wants to pick it up for a little while and take a little, inquiry. And so creating the English into modern day English was one of the goals. One of the examples is chapter 1. The title originally was Salutations. Today, in this book, it's greetings, because talk to someone 25 and under, they don't know what salutations means. And I actually I did my own little anecdotal sample. I asked 4 or 5 groups of students that were high school to middle school, and out of about 300 students, I got one person that gave me the answer to what salutations means. So it's not a common word used today, and what we did is we did a lot of that kind of changing. It is noted in the footnotes, those changes. But I think that teachers that are studying about Rhode Island history, that are teaching about Roger Williams, that are teaching about the Narragansett people, will be able to use this information from this book in a much more readily available way. And so I'm going to let now each of you or anyone, it doesn't have to be in order, but if you have a particular thing you'd like to add to why we did the book and add a little more information, a little more depth. Okay, well, I will continue to add while they're thinking. If you have something.
Well, I think we said why we wrote it.
Well, I think that from my perspective, there was, all of those reasons, and the access was the biggest point. But going a little more in depth, I would say that as we share some of the quotes in the book, that it was also to give a Narragansett perspective, but to expound on what Roger Williams had to say. Because I always try to tell people, it's not like we're saying what he wrote was that we didn't like everything, but we are saying he was an immigrant to a new land that didn't know the people, didn't know the culture, and didn't know the language. So sometimes he made mistakes. Sometimes he just didn't explain something fully. Sometimes he just omitted it because he just wasn't part of it. And so in our footnotes, you'll notice that we added details about errors he made in language. So for example, the word son is a word that you put at the beginning of a sentence to make it a question. And sometimes he used it, and sometimes he didn't. And so we consistently put it in. That's an example. Those three are the experts on all the grammatical stuff, I will tell you. But that's an example. The other thing that's an example is we added detail. So, for example, he talks about the Nakomo, which is a traditional Thanksgiving, which if you'd like to come to one, it's on December 7th here at Tomaquag Museum. And he talks about that, but then we added footnotes to go with it to add to the fact that we still do that Thanksgiving today, and things that we agreed with and things that maybe we thought he could have added, or maybe he just didn't know. And so we'll share a few more of those. So now I'm going to have us share a little bit about the process that we took in creating this book. The creating the work that we did, the unique partnerships and strategies, and how we went about literally the process of going through this. Someone want to share from the very beginning?
I think early on, I recognized that we could do a lot more in our language classes if we had something like a vocabulary list we could sort. We could reorder by, its subject, and that wasn't there. And we had short lists, and I thought, well, what if we just had an electronic version of the key, and that would be so much more useful for our class. So I just started plugging away until I had typed in the key, and then mentioned it to Dawn, and she decided, that we could use that. We could develop a whole new version that kind of embraces, the modern changes or the modern version of it.
Yes, and thinking of it and looking at the footnotes, I had marked out here one thing that I had thought I'd like to share. Now, of course, if I could find it, would be good. There's many, and I seem to have lost my footnote that I wanted to share. But I guess what I especially liked was looking at Kathleen Bragdon as the linguist coming in. There's seats up here in the front. There's a whole empty bench. It's a whole bench. We understand, thank you. Kathleen Bragdon, in giving some of the grammatical insights for our people so that we could more easily utilize this book in terms of how to put together words, how to possess words, and how to use prefixes and suffixes to extend the word. I found that very important and done in a way that was, again, more easily readable. So I think you'll find that the addition of Kathleen's introduction, as well as we continue to have Roger Williams' introduction and his words about how to pronounce, it continues to be there, but I think it gives a greater in-depthness to it.
The one thing that's a little bit, I think, complicated or about accessing this particular edition is that the introduction by Roger Williams and all of the general observations are in still his original Middle English. So the font is easier to read, but the spelling is his Middle English. And we don't really tell you that at the explain that the sort of easiest and quickly most accessible, most interesting for an English speaker to read the book is to really kind of go through the lists of vocabulary, but also then read the observations in between. And there's just so much detail about and respect for the Narragansett lifestyle. And what, he explains that their moccasins were so well tanned that if they were out in the snow or in the rain, they could just wring water out of them at the end of the day and hang them up, above the fire for the evening, and in the morning they were good as new and still soft and fairly waterproof and that sort of thing. And or that the Narragansett, he says, you never see, or very rarely see even elderly Narragansett walking with a walking stick, using a stick. And yet they encourage Roger Williams to carry a stick because he didn't carry a weapon or a knife or a gun with him, and they thought, a stick is the minimal amount of protection one should have going through the forest. But they didn't have to use it for walking. If they were carrying a stick, it was more as a tool and walking through. Just the details of life like that, and from the early 1600s, I find extremely fascinating, and it's to have the English be more modern is very helpful to that.
Well, in listening to that, I do want to say that the observations are updated. It's the more particulars that are left in his style.
Right, the general more particulars.
Yes, yes. So, but in thinking about what we were saying here is that Roger Williams really goes about saying that these Narragansett people are quite incredible. On and on he says that, he talks about, that the Christian folks are supposedly Christian, but yet here are the Narragansett doing these things that one would say are more Christian and more giving and loving and caring, welcoming, offering grand hospitality. The book goes on and on about how wonderful that Roger Williams thinks of the Narragansett. He also says some things that we find a bit offensive, but we footnoted that. But generally speaking, he says, that the Narragansett have opened this land, they've opened their home. If someone does not want to sleep because they're in their house, they will sleep outside to let the stranger come in and have their home. And within all of that, though, when we get to 1675 in the Great Swamp Massacre and with King Philip's War, and afterwards, Roger Williams then says, yes, we will enslave these people. We will send them to the Caribbean in slavery. And it's like it is forgotten that we are the people that were here and that welcomed so many and offered hospitality, as this book, The Key into the Language, attests to. So it's that kind of juxtaposition of where we are today, it all comes back in this circle, and we think of this place. We are the indigenous people here, the Narragansett, and when you read this, I want you to keep in mind that we're here today. It's not like, they were the people back then in the 1600s. That we have continued, and we continue with a lot of our traditions that were mentioned in here, and some things he maybe got wrong, but we continue to live and look at our world according to what we see. That we see the sun and the moon and the stars and Mother Earth and all of the animals, and we think of ourselves as in relationship to all of that we are not above it, but we are a part of it.
So throughout the book, we have a myriad of footnotes. I'm going to read just one. It's chapter 16, Earth and Its Fruits. And the footnote 1 is on the word Aki, earth or land. Nukasaki, Mother Earth, or Aki, Earth, is important to us. As Narragansett people, we are of this land. The bones and blood of our ancestors are here. Unaweekan, we dwell here. A song passed down reflects on our connection to this land, past, present, and future. And I think that's an example. It kind of built on what my mother Dawn was saying. We are trying to let people know and reflect on things that are mentioned in the book, but also about what we're doing today and how we're connected to this land and this place. And so we have the footnotes that have no initials in front are the teams here. The ones that say KB are Katie Bragdon in particular. And sometimes you'll see that we referenced other editions that reference Goddard or Trumbull, who are professors and historians and anthropologists and the like that have commented on this in previous editions. We had quite a row with the publisher because we really wanted to keep all the ones that we really liked in the book as well. But he talked us into that scholars that wanted to compare and contrast could take each edition from the original to today and do that scholarly work of comparing and contrasting, and we didn't have to do that for them. But the ones that we were desperate to keep, we put in the footnote to add to that. So in this case, we have footnote 2, Trumbull, delineate it's Sanaquamuk, field or garden, and Trumbull had noted it delineated an enclosed and cultivated field or garden. And so we wanted people to understand that. So that's an example of another kind of footnote. If there's anyone on the panel that has a particular footnote they want to share, they're welcome to now or when you're ready. But while they're looking, I did want to just mention the collections and the photographs in the book. That was really important to us, and I will say that we've gotten a lot of comments about how great it was to have the images, particularly for things that people maybe didn't really understand what it looked like that macaque there. Sometimes when you see it written and someone says it's a type of basket or container, you still don't have an image of what that container looks like. And so there's one in here that I thought was particularly interesting. On page 34, we have images of the spoons in the mortar and pestle. So spoons, kanamawonk for spoons is in there, and then takionk, a pounding mortar. So we put the mortar and pestle there from our collections, and the spoons are actually from the Dawn Dove collection. For people to see, today, especially for young people, they're going to envision the spoon that's in the drawer in their kitchen and not what we really mean. So where we could, we tried to utilize the Tomaquag collection or the people within this group's personal collections to represent a few of the ideas and images that were there.
Just to share on that, in Roger Williams' Key, he states that we did not have a drum, and we really disagreed with that from what our oral tradition has given us. We think of the drum, it's the heartbeat of Mother Earth, and in addition to that, we have what we call talking rocks or drum rocks, or sometimes referred to cup and saucer, and there's an image of that on page 18, the bottom image. If you go throughout the Northeast and maybe even down to the Midway, you will see these cup and saucer rocks or talking rocks, and that is something that my grandmother, my father, they always pointed out to me, where we'd see one, and there's a few that every time we go by, my grandkids, they probably say, yeah, Thomas, we know it. It's coming up, we know it, we've got to look there. But it was definitely something that I really wanted. I felt it was very much our own, and I didn't want to really share that knowledge of it. But with the way that our world is, and there's so much development going on, that I want you to know it. I want you to know it so that you can say to others, oh, wait a minute, that's a special archaeological feature that's important to the indigenous people of this land. We can't build there, we can't knock that down. So I was very pleased to have that included within this edition.
Anyone else have any particular? So on page 95, I just wanted to, as we're talking about pictures and images and things, we also put in a few maps. This chapter is called The Sea, and we wanted this particular map because it's a map of Narragansett Bay, and we wanted people to be thinking about that space, a bay that's now named after the people and the place, and thinking of our ancestors and our people today traveling on that bay and fishing that bay and living our lifeways around that bay, as we still can do today, with a little bit more obstructions in the way. But it's each map that we chose, we tried to be really thoughtful about how it connected with the book and the things that were being represented in the book. So, the next topic that I really wanted to bring up, and it's so nice to see quite a few young Narragansett people in the room, youth, I'll say, the broadest term, the federal definition all the way to 28, because when we really created this, we were thinking of them more than anyone. We know it will be helpful and useful for lots of people. I've had the blessing of already being in some college classes and presenting this to some teachers, and people are very excited about the opportunity to use this book, and we're really thankful for that. But more than anything, we wanted it to be useful for our community, and we wanted it to be useful for our children, and we wanted it to be useful to the next generations to come, so that they can continue this language forward. As someone who's 53, I know way more Narragansett now than I did when I was a child. Although I knew some, I know a lot more now. But what I am so thankful of is that the young people in our community know way more Narragansett at their age now than probably I do now. But like, they know a lot. They can say a lot. They can do a lot in the language. And I think that's really, really powerful and important. And we're hoping that this book will be a tool that they can use when they're writing prayers down that they want to do, or they're writing an essay and they want to put it in the language, or they're writing captions for their artwork, or they're naming their children, that they can utilize this as one of the resources to help them. But also, it's very validating, in my opinion, to read a book that now not only talks about us, but through these footnotes reflects our own perspectives, our own ideologies, our own beliefs, and our own feelings about our own community.
Well, footnote 3 in the chapter on seasons of the year, page 60, Roger Williams had spoken of that they have 13 months according to the several moons, and to each of them they give significant names. And then he lists a few. But in our footnote, if you go down to 3, we've gone into quite a detail about that. Traditionally, we celebrate 13 Thanksgivings, one for each new moon of the year. Our seasons were spring, summer, fall, and winter. And of course, there was the late season and the early part of the season. Our moons reflect these changes in the seasons. Within the spring season or late winter, there is maple sugar Thanksgiving, the fishing moon, corn planting moon, or planting moon. And late spring or early summer, there's strawberry Thanksgiving. In the summer season, there's green bean Thanksgiving, ocean harvest known today as a clam bake, green corn Thanksgiving, and in late summer, the cranberry Thanksgiving. In autumn or fall, the moon of falling leaves and time of last harvest, the hunter's moon, and the Nakomo in late fall or early winter. The moon for giving. Winter brings storytelling moon, moon of falling leaves, and moon of ice fishing. So there's quite a bit in these footnotes that give that in-depth look at an indigenous perspective.
So I want to backtrack a little bit because I think I skipped one thing. The introduction, the preface was written by me with these three ladies' help, and the introduction was written by Katie Bragdon. And she really goes into depth around the linguistical information as well as anthropological information, and connecting, her scholarly work around Roger Williams and the Narragansett people. But I really love her conclusion. There's wonderful tidbits through the whole thing. But I love the part where she concludes and she says, Tomaquag Museum has produced and edited this new edition of Roger Williams' Key into the Language to highlight the Narragansett people's unique view of this celebrated work and to remind readers that Williams was the fortunate beneficiary of Narragansett generosity and wisdom, without which the key could not have been written. Through modern tribal members, we can still hear echoes of the 17th century Narragansett world he tried to convey. Taba Miquan Namian, probably butchered that, sorry. I thank you for remembering me. And I think that that's a beautiful sentiment that's at the end. Did anyone here have anything else they wanted to mention about the introduction? There was one other thing that I wanted to mention that is on page 120. I feel that this is something we did throughout the book, is to connect from the past to the present. And so in footnote 6, it is referencing these words, Inach nin anawa, let my word stand. And it's the late Elasikatau, our footnote states, the late Elasikatau, Narragansett tribal ethnohistorian, ended her invocation or speeches with these powerful words. And as I mentioned to you, when I've heard it before, I say it so nicely. And there's a skill to reading Narragansett that sometimes I struggle with. But I think throughout this book, we mentioned those kinds of details of things that are transferred through time that were still being used regularly throughout our culture and our history. And I try to remind people that although maybe not a fluent language, our language has been a continued language. And in one of the films I had the blessing of being interviewed on that was about language in New England, Ella was also there, and she was quoted in the film, so long as one person speaks one word, the language continues. And that's something that, as a people who have been oppressed for, over 400 years, the fact that we still have this continuation of language through our songs, through our ceremonies, through our prayers, through our games, and through our community knowledge, through our traditional names, and as we push back on in decolonizing this country, naming our children and grandchildren in the language today on their birth certificates, and through general conversation, it's really important. And this is one of those tools that can be helpful in helping people understand. And I think these three women here need a tremendous amount of credit in really making sure the grammar for the Narragansett was correct. If you plot anyone in another foreign country with a language that they don't know very well, they make mistakes on the grammar and structure of the language. And in this book, we footnote when Roger Williams made errors. They didn't stop the people from understanding each other. And it's one of the things that I say as a teacher, a mother, and a grandmother now, is that we want them, although grammar is important, my mother's the grammar queen, it's important, but what's more important is for you to speak. And so that means if we have to do it in sort of baby steps and do it a little bit inaccurately, it's more important, so long as you know what I said and we were communicating and understanding each other, then that's what we have to do. And we can always pick up the grammar and corrections later. That's really important to do. So anyone else have something they'd like to share at the moment?
I can't find it, but maybe you know where it is. I'm looking for the footnote that quotes Verazon. What page is that?
Ooh, I don't know if I know the answer to that. I'm thinking it might be in the C on Narragansett Bay section, so you might take a look there. But as I was saying in the slide up on the screen there, we're an oral people, which is why I say that I speak so much better when I've heard it before. And in our community, that top right picture on that slide presentation are our elders from the language committee talking about the work that we do and why it's important for us to continue the language. The bottom picture happens to be some of the young people that are quite a bit older now that are actually here today as part of our language project that we did a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, where we decided as a people, vibrant languages have new works and don't just rely on all the things that have come in the past. And so as a community, as a language program, we decided that we would create new songs. And these new songs were written in our language. and they were telling different things. Like one is Wakoni Neep, which is our sweet water, and it's all about maple sugaring and maple sugar Thanksgiving. Another is Kanashawonk, which is a ceremonial song that the elders wrote after a ceremony down at Great Swamp, where the massacre took place, to honor those that lost their lives and those that survived, to pass forward our culture and tradition to the next generations that came. And so those songs are really important. And today, more and more tribal members are writing new songs, they're writing poetry, they're writing narrative, they're writing prayers, and they're feeling very empowered. And I really think the fact that the way that we function is intergenerationally allows for everyone to feel empowered, to embrace the language. And I think that project of New Works reminded the whole community, oh, wait a minute, I can do this. I know enough language that I can write about it. I can make a prayer. And more and more people are doing that and documenting it the best that they know how to spell it and put circumflexes and accents on things where they go. Someone have anything they'd like to share at the moment? So I'm going to pause here, and if they come up with something else they'd like to share, they can. But I'm going to let the audience, if they have some questions now that they might want to share or ask. Anyone? Yes.
So there's numbers in here, big numbers.
Big numbers.
I mean,
Go ahead.
40,000 or something. So how were they? How did you remember? If you made a deal for 40,000 something, was it recorded or marked or something? Was there any written marker for numbers involved in trading and things?
An exact answer I can't give you, but do know that we did use wampum to record an exchange of some sort that could document some event. So I can't say anything more than that. That we certainly had ways of doing pictographs on deer skin that would show that some transaction had happened.
Yeah.
So just piggybacking on that, certainly through wampum, as my mother stated, on pictographs on hides, also in stone paintings. There are pictographs in stone shelters today in Rhode Island. There's also there's traditional stamping on stamp baskets that denote our culture, our communities, the flora and fauna in our communities that are there. But keeping in mind that until Europeans came, our trade was this for that. There wasn't an intermediary piece of a monetary structure, and so there wasn't really a need for that kind of documentation until Europeans came along. And you have to keep in mind that we were utilizing traditional trade that we were doing was, a giving and a swapping, if you will, and a barter. That was the word I was looking for, a barter system. And so it was for thousands and thousands of years prior to European contact. And it's only about approximately 40 years that Europeans morphed wampum into a monetary unit. And I say them because it was because they had a need for us to have something to symbolize a commodification process in making something a monetary unit. There were also things that other ways that we documented. I think she has an added.
Well, I was just thinking when you were saying that, because in the book there's all these giant numbers that are listed, and so don't forget that when the English came here, and then they're saying, well, oh, you need to pay us so much wampum. You have to, and so, these numbers are developed, but they're using the basic numbers that we already, that's our language for those numbers. And I think what Loren was getting at is that, we were doing barter, and now all of a sudden, wampum, that a lot of people think of as money, and that was not our use of wampum. It certainly was not money. It was utilized for denoting some kind of event. I guess you could say a sacred kind of exchange in that way. Also denoting if someone has died, you gift wampum as a sacred item, oftentimes putting that even in the burial ground. So not thinking of it as we think of money today, that, oh, I can have this much wampum and now I'll go buy something. That was definitely not the way that it was used. And then, as Loren said, the English needed some kind of monetary system, and they didn't want to put out a lot of gold. They didn't even have gold and silver that much for themselves. So they saw that we highly valued these beads that were made from the whelk and from the quahog, and so they said, oh, these little things, they kind of look like pennies. We'll, and then, of course, they flooded the market, made the value of them go down by manufacturing them themselves, and this whole thing, and then it was used as a way to to penalize us in order to get some kind of what is the word I'm trying to think of? In order to, pardon me?
An infraction?
Yeah, some infraction that was made. So what? Your hogs have destroyed our clam beds, and so what? That there's no recourse for that. But if we went on what the English are now calling their land that we thought we held communally, now they'll say, oh, by court order, you need to pay us, 40,000 wampum beads. So I think that's where all these big numbers come. And when you start doing that, that's a lot of time and effort for the Narragansett people to be taking something that was used more for a mnemonic device, more for sacred commemoration of events, and now using it as a monetary thing.
Also, we did connect to those large numbers, thinking about like the celestials and thinking about this landscape that's loaded with trees and resources that were here that were very important to us that had very large numbers. So we had a number system. We weren't writing it down in the same way that Roger Williams and the English denote in this book, but we were still utilizing those numbers in reference to things that had large numbers. There were also other ways that we were using numbers through games, traditional games, Hubbub, and to name just one, there's games that use numbers, and there were ways to quantify through that. So there's that's a little more complex, but it gives you a little example of some other places that we utilize numbers. Any other questions? Sure.
Hi, Loren. I was looking at this footnote on page 87. It says, the tradition of burning fields continues today. It provides the nutrients needed to enrich the soil. Along with this method of soil preparation, our community is still known for utilizing fish to fertilize the mounds for the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And I was going to ask, how you make the, the determination about something as being a traditional practice and what have you. But the more interesting question that came to my mind was, in doing this project, were there things that you recognize or came to recognize in the process of working on this book as being more significant cultural practices than you had prior? In other words, not to say that, his writing, that Roger Williams is defining, what Narragansett culture is really like. But in doing this and looking at the things that he describes, burning fields, what have you, are there things that people do today that you recognize as part of this? In other words, that help to reinforce what it means to be Narragansett today?
Sure. I think that throughout the footnotes we did that.
Yeah.
We tried to reinforce things that we see that are happening today. Now, keeping in mind this is one project, and at some point the publisher's like, you guys got to stop. How many footnotes can you have? So there's probably going to be things that even ourselves will go back through and go, oh, I wish we had talked about this. I think that we try to reinforce the oral tradition that's been passed down to us. That's how we documented history, throughout time, is through our oral tradition and through our family stories and through our cultural norms and values. We also try to reinforce things that we think have been documented in historical texts incorrectly, based on the erasure of our people and the detribalization of our people, and the fact that things like archaeologists are a science, and if they can't prove something, then they say that we didn't do it. I don't know why they can't make the assumption that we did do it, but they can make the assumption that we didn't, since they didn't really know for sure. And one of those things is corn. It's, for me as a Narragansett person, I think it's the most ludicrous thing I ever heard, because we have so many corn ceremonies in our culture and in our tradition. It's woven throughout our year. It's a sustaining force for us. It's something that is symbolic of fertility of the people. It is symbolic in our community in so many ways, and certainly one of the most important staples in our diet. We have so many different kinds of corn dishes, and it's not something that was always recorded that way. There's anthropological and archaeological books that say that we didn't grow corn. Well, of course, archaeologists have now proved that we indeed did grow corn, but for about a 40-year period of time, the academics were writing we didn't grow corn, but those books are still out there. So people still, if that's the research they're doing, they're like, oh, the Narragansett didn't grow corn. They must have appropriated the idea of corn from someone else. It's that kind of ridiculousness and another attempt of erasure and a devaluing of our culture and our communities that we're speaking about in some of these footnotes. But also, just as people and educators and culture bearers, we're reminding people of that just because it's written in a book doesn't mean, any book, doesn't mean that one, they're the only people that are doing such a thing, and two, that every book is correct in every way. And I think we're stating this with this book, people that were reading the key, that were bound and determined to make our relatives, the Mohawks, cannibals. We spoke about that in this book, and we spoke about how the language was misunderstood and how over time it transferred from bark eaters to meat eaters to cannibals. And, it's that kind of thing that we can talk about in here, and get people to understand. And also to understand that he was coming from his puritanical perspective, his religious perspective, his that time period, his Eurocentric perspective. And so sometimes you just misunderstand things because you just don't know. And so this is our opportunity, or a opportunity, to share those perspectives and kind of broaden that understanding.
So with regard to the corn, it reinforces the idea that, corn was very much a part of what Narragansett had been doing since time immemorial. But my question is also, is there something that in doing this you now see as, let's say, traditional practice that you didn't necessarily see as traditional practice prior? I mean, I'm thinking about what Dawn had said with regard to drumming, and in looking at this, and the words that describe Narragansett people as having no drums, it makes you think of the extent to which you have drums in a manner of speaking, and all of a sudden you think of Narragansett people as associated with drums in a way that maybe you didn't before, which I think is really interesting. That is the kind of thing that I'm wondering about. If there were any other things like that you know, in the process of doing the book, you not only realize or double down on feelings that you had prior, and you, let's say, interject your voice into the you know, field of thought about Narragansett people, but that new ideas come about it in the process. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
I certainly had an experience, you know, over the years of having discussions like this together, and how much I learned about Narragansett practice and culture. But like one of them, in a way, it's kind of coming from the opposite way. I mean, it's what you bring up, but when Roger Williams says, oh, you know, they didn't have drums, and my Narragansett editors say, we sure did. You know, that's crazy. It really made it much more important to me, and I, you know, could see, wow, that these aspects of erasure,
Right.
it really go so deep. Another thing that he says in the book is that they had no dried fruits, and that's ridiculous, right? Of course they had dried fruits. So the fact that he said that really became, how
The impetus for highlighting this thing that you might not consciously think to highlight.
exactly.
Okay, that makes
Exactly.
That's what I was finding as a real potential value. Not only in the process of correcting things, these things that you wouldn't think to correct come about. I think is the
Right. You would expect. You would assume
Yeah.
that there was corn. You would assume that there is dried fruits, and
Right.
then there's several corrections like that he just totally missed it somehow.
It seems important to go through the process of something like this in order to see what needs to be corrected rather than what we assumed from the outset, which is that yes, they had dried fruit and yes, they had corn. What else didn't we know to say that they might not have had or they might have thought? The cannibalism thing is, I don't know, a whole discussion about deeper levels that would be hard to maybe bring up.
And the problem is, people from historical societies keep putting, even in their documentation where they've written this little booklet about the Narragansett people, keep calling us cannibals. So it's like an old English or European thing that has been contrived, and it's about the dehumanization of indigenous people. If you kind of dehumanize us and make us animalistic and, you know, and someone that you can fear, then that allows you to do the actions that you do to oppress and kill and enslave our people. And so, you know, we're trying to correct those things, and hopefully that will influence people that keep republishing old manuscripts over and over again, that keep saying the same thing that's inaccurate. Kind of speaking to what you were asking before, on chapter 9, which is page 57, there's footnote 1, it's Matauban, it is day. The footnote is, today, Indian time implies arriving late or in your own time rather than the prescribed time. And it is interesting that Williams remarks on how punctual we were as a people. It is our thought that the change from the observation of time in a natural and/or reflection of the celestials to an artificial time related to the clock is what caused this drastic change in behavior. For example, starting work at 9 a.m. is an artificial time rather than beginning your workday after waking with the rise of the sun, blessing your day with a morning ceremony, breaking your nightly fast, and beginning your day. Each portion of the day was based on the natural order. So for me, that kind of reflects on what you're saying. It's something that today is completely interpreted differently, and in our history was reflected on in a totally different way. But yet that language is still sort of here, but it means something
Yeah, we
different.
wouldn't think of that when, or maybe you wouldn't even think of making that correction had you not been in the process of doing this kind of book. And then that's the interesting thing to me, that we have a larger discussion about really, complicated issues. As opposed to, not that correcting the past isn't, or correcting things isn't like the important thing to do, but it's thinking deeply about them in a way that we discover things about this.
Well, I think our goal
to discover.
was that. It
Yeah.
was the thinking deeply about what was being reflected in the book. And yes, making some corrections, but more about giving more information. Because there are plenty of times where Roger Williams brings up something that is a truth. For example, that we did Sweat Lodge. I've been told, oh no, you didn't do Sweat Lodge. That's something that came from, and they'll name some other tribe, because they read it in a book. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Yes, we did do Sweat Lodge, and we continued to do Sweat Lodge, and we've always done Sweat Lodge. But until, unfortunately, you whip out a book from the 1600s that a Eurocentric person wrote that we did Sweat Lodge, do they want to believe us? Which I find really an affront to my humanity, I guess. Because I think that we should be taken at our word on the culture and tradition that is our people, that's been passed down through all of our families, and we know who we are. We don't need Roger Williams to tell us who we are. We know who we are. However, we found that this was an intriguing process to go through. We knew that this was one of the many tools that our community was utilizing for language and continuation of language. Tools that were written by European people, like Eliot's Bible and what's the other dictionary? Natick Dictionary, The Key to the Language, but also what was just passed down orally through our communities over and over again, or written phonetically in the way that they wanted to write it in their notebook, or in the front cover of a Bible, or in a myriad of places that language was passed on from one generation to the other. Anyone else have any comments on that question? Anyone here have another question? Yes.
Yeah, my brain is still spinning from talking at the Talking Rocks. This looks like a huge talking rock.
It is huge.
I just went to tell you why I wanted to know a little bit more about them, to see if possibly, I heard about one recently. I went to a presentation in Barrington, and they had, the picture was kind of grainy, a lot of his videos were, but it was really good talking about all these. Actually, you have one of the brochures here for a map of the Somes area. And so it's, but obviously one of it's a glacier boulder type thing. You can see that, and then there are little, you can see the edges of them, dark rocks around it. And he said that he'd been trying to find out what it was for years, and he'd gone to so-and-so academic here and academic there. And I said, asked him if he had gone to the native people, and he said yes, and nobody knew what it was. Well, it looked to me like it might be some kind of a talking rock. I haven't seen it yet. He goes out on some field trips around several things there. And since I'm new to Rhode Island, I know all about all the rocks in California and where the initiation ceremonies were and blah, blah, blah. And he has one of those. I mentioned that because something called Margaret's Rock. Are you familiar with that? It's, anyway, it's in the Barrington, Loren area someplace. So he goes out on walking tours. That's why I signed up. Let me know when you're going. But I just, when I looked at this, although it's different shape, and I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, maybe that's a talking rock.
Well,
so are you familiar with it at all?
one of the things that we can probably, this is probably a longer story that'll get us really segued, and I don't want to keep people too late, but I'm thinking that we can connect you and your friend to people within our community that do a lot of work around cultural landscapes and the stone features that are in the land and what they represent, and maybe help him figure out what features that he's seeing and what they refer to, if possible. Sometimes they've been disturbed in ways that you can't delineate where they were originally from, but sometimes you can, and so we can try to help with that. So I'm going to thank our panelists. Thank you so much, our co-editors here. And if you have other questions, you can certainly ask them informally while we're signing books, if anyone would like their books signed. Thank you so much for coming to Tomaquag Museum and sharing in our launch of our book. And if you can't get enough, or if a friend says, oh, I wished I'd gone, you can tell them that I will be at Books on the Pond in Charlestown on Wednesday evening this week. And I've already thrown it out, if anyone from this panel would like to join me, they're welcome to, but I'm trying not to torture you if you don't have to be. Thank you so much.